Demoot.
I was recently in a spiritual direction session, and the directee asked me, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to relate to God as someone who is made in his image? How does that form my identity? And how do I live that out? In this video, I want to unpack what does it mean to be made in the image of God? How does that impact your relationship with Christ and your vocation and your calling? I want to slow down and share some musings on it and hopefully offer some invitations on what that could look like in your life so that it's not about performing, but really more living into an identity that was placed inside of you by the Trinity himself. We're losing light here. Let me see if I can get this video in one take. Oftentimes we hear the word image of God and we have all sorts of associations with that. We might think of pressure like, oh, I have to perform. I have to have these moral sets of duties. It must somehow inform my identity, but we don't really pause and go, well, what does that actually mean at the fundamental level that I'm made in the image of God, and what implications does that have for my life? We oftentimes turn it into something fragile, like an identity that somehow we have to discover, that we have to protect against, and it can lead us to lots of different types of fear or even moralism, trying to behave a certain way or to live up to this standard that we're not sure how God has formed us. And when I found that when we live in alignment to how God has wired us, designed us, and cooperate with the Spirit, life actually becomes easier because we're flowing from God's power versus out of our own strength. It's the paradox that Paul talks about. When I'm weak, I am strong. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, so that therefore we can boast in weakness. I'm meshing two scriptures together. I'm going to share with you actually what the Hebrew scriptures seem to imply with the word image and likeness. I think just getting a little snapshot can help give some color to this bony structure of what does it mean to be made in the image of God. So in Genesis 1:26-27, it says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky." ... I'm jumping to it. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So there's two words that show up here in Hebrew. The first one is
B'Tselem
for image, and the second one is
Demoot
for likeness. And in the ancient world, these words carry a lot of weight. In theology, we like to talk about it as thick words. These words have a lot of power and meaning. The word for image in ancient Near East, when a king would conquer a territory, he would put a statue in that land, not as decoration, but like as a sign of ownership, of I've been here, my rule extends here. And so Genesis is making this radical claim, like God is establishing his presence on the earth through us to some degree. So he doesn't just place statues in creation, he creates living being made in his own image. So we're actually a living sign of God's presence on the earth, which has so much weight. The image of God, it's not just like a compliment. It's not just a characteristic that we have. It's not the fact that we have a body, but it does include the fact that we have a body. We have bodies that are here and now, but it's actually more used as like a verb, where there's actually a way of being and relating to God, being made in his image. In the English language, it's hard to put this stuff into words. The second word, demoot, I think. Again, I'm going to put it on the screen. It adds this nuance. So it says you're like God, but you're not God. I've been reading in Exodus 3 where Moses meets God in the burning bush. And one of the things that Moses asks of God is, when I go to the Israelites and tell them, who sent you, who sent me, what am I going to say? Who are you? And scholars have debated about this for a long time, but how God speaks about himself is, he says, I am that I am. Sometimes it's translated as I am who I am, which can mean I exist, but I am that I am. Dallas Willard talks about how that is a distinction that actually separates him from other creatures, in the sense of he is that he is. He is in existence by himself, not in relationship to others outside of himself, in the sense of he belongs to himself. He's not like, who I am is usually in relationship with other people. I think because God is different, he is other. Isaiah says his thoughts are above our thoughts, his ways are not our ways. So we're made in his image, we're made in his likeness, but we're not him, but we're connected to him. That is part of what it means to be human. Like a child growing to resemble the parent, we have the DNA, but we have our own identity. I don't know if that example fully captures it. There's a sense of we are appointed to represent him and as participation in dominion. It goes on in the verse for Genesis 1-3, talking about how God put us on the earth to rule, to care, to have dominion over the earth. So there's this responsibility and there's this cooperation, being like God, made in his image, not only as his representative, like the king is sending somebody to a far distant land, but you're not with the king, but this cooperation and this participation in, I created the world, but you are also responsible, made in my image, to rule in my place as an extension of me in the earth. That gives so much shape to our identity, not just personality traits. It actually impacts how we carry that role. What does it mean to be in the image of God? I want to give just a couple quick thoughts of how some of the saints have wrestled with this idea. Irenaeus talked a lot about humanity as an unfinished purpose and how it gives us intrinsic purpose. One of the things he said in the 2nd century is that the image was given at creation and that likeness is grown into through maturity. We can talk about becoming a disciple of Jesus or becoming like Christ or imitating Christ. We don't just do external behaviors or do spiritual disciplines like Christ that somehow manufactures a carbon copy. We are ourselves, but in and through him, we have the image of God because we were created by him and in and through him. And as the New Testament talks about, in him we live and move and have our being. But that growth is part of the design. God created us to grow in likeness. We can become more and more like him as we live into that image, which is an interesting position or orientation. And then Basil the Great, I love some of his thoughts. He's an Eastern Orthodox patristic father, and he talks a lot about how it's almost like we're an icon, where icon is like a window to the saint's life or an image into to look beyond. So we get to be signposts to God as an image bearer. We resemble God to a degree, but we're pointing beyond ourselves to the one who created the heavens and earth. He talks about sin not erasing the image of God, but it does distort the mirror. The mirror has fragments. Have you ever been in a funny house, or like a fun house, where the mirrors are all funky? Because of sin, it has now made crooked some of the ways in which we image God back. Our calling is to live and to work with the Spirit to continue to transfer our life. We have been transferred into the kingdom of light, but to continue to live out that by facing our sin, by going on an interior journey, an external one as well. Just a personal story real quick to break off from the theology is when I was actually in my early days of attending spiritual direction and really having Christ reshape and reform my identity, which was really marred by a lot of unhealthy, unhelpful messages growing up. I remember having a moment where I had a vision in spiritual direction where my director was having me walk through how I felt about myself in the presence of God. And I saw myself just frantically scurrying about in front of a picture. If you've ever seen some of those old movies where there's like a painting of a grandparent or a child in like a bedroom in the colonial or Victorian days, where before there was photographs, there was these pictures that were painted on this fabric canvas. Well, that's like what I was pushing up, and the fabric was all torn and tattered, and it was an image, but the image wasn't even that beautiful. It was of me, and I kept putting it up, and I was frantic. And then I heard this whisper behind me saying my name, and then slowly a tap on my shoulder, and I stopped, and I could feel that it was Jesus. I just knew. He tapped my shoulder. I said, "Look at me." And I said, "No, I can't look at you. I can't show you this image. I can't show you this image of me." And I was hiding it. And he said, "That's not who you are." And I just, "What do you mean?" And he pulled out a mirror and he handed me a mirror. But as soon as I grabbed the mirror, I was actually facing him. He says, "You are only you when you're looking at me." I remember that so clearly. You are only you when you're looking at me. And so I think that experience for me really reshaped, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? We only find our true identity by looking into Christ and having Christ look into us. And it's a both and. John Calvin talks about the double knowledge of self and knowledge of God. And so what does it mean to be made in Christ's image? For the sake of time, I don't want to go into more about Christ is the real Adam. He's the ideal human, and we live our life in him. But because the word in Greek, eikoin, I think is how it is a different word, the word image. And Paul says that in Colossians 1:15, it says the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. 2 Corinthians 4:4, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. And that word has shifted. But we don't look at what it means to be human by looking backward at Adam or by looking at other people. We know what it means to be human by looking at Christ, because Christ embodied full humanity. What does that all mean for our spiritual formation, which is the process of becoming like Christ? It gives us an invitation to not strive and to try to become something that we can't become on our own. That we actually have an intrinsic value and an intrinsic image. We have a imprint of God in us from God from the beginning, that while sin has distorted a lot of it, it hasn't wrecked who you are, that you have intrinsic value because you exist, and that God is speaking life into you now, and that you have life, and you are an example, and you are a window into the Lord. You are a representative of God in the world. And on one hand, that does give us a ton of responsibility and weight. And on the other hand, and I hope that actually anchors it, is that we have this invitation to receive and rest in it. That it's not something that we achieve, that we try to perfect, that we have to fix. It is something that by the grace of God, we have just been gifted, and that we have now a built-in invitation to become more and more like God by the power of God, because he created us in his image, which means he's created us for relationality, to be caught up in his life and continue to do that with other believers. So it's not a personality trait. It's not that I just have some type of special magic gifting, a socioeconomic status. I have more spiritual gifts because I'm more eloquent, because I'm XYZ. You fill in whatever role and title in your life that has given you a lot of power. We get to set those aside and pick them up from time to time, from the fact that we are made in God's image and that God rules and reigns and is present on the earth. Because of my existence, I am mirroring, somehow proclaiming the glory of God. And most of the time, I do not do that very well. So my question I want to leave with you: where are you sensing God inviting you to glorify him by just existing? Where can you receive? Where can you lean into more of your receptivity of God? And then how are you responding to him? Maybe that's being less critical of yourself, by being kinder to yourself, maybe by not trying to clean up your sin on your own, but bringing it to the Lord, practicing confession. There's so many ways to live into your image, and I have no idea what your circumstance is, so I do not want to speak into your life. It's not like we're having a one-on-one right now, but I just wanted to leave you with just some thoughts about it. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about what it means to be made in the image of God? What resonates? What other questions do you have? And if you want a place to process more of what it means to follow Christ and to practice the presence of God in a community, I do have a community called the Sanctus Room, where we read scripture every other week formationally. We read books together about spiritual formation, and we do group direction. You're invited to come to find out more of that below. I pray this blesses you, and I will see you in the next video.